So hello to everyone. My name is Bethany Pearson. I am the program and volunteer coordinator for the Everett Roehl Marshfield Public Library. And as always, I would like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It is a little bit different than our programs in person, but it's very fun to be able to bring these programs to you in the comfort of your own home. Tonight, we are going to be doing our family history talks on ProQuest Historical Newspapers. If you have any questions specifically regarding ProQuest or any of the family history talks that we have done in the past, please use the Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your screen, whether you are in mobile or on the desktop. The Q&A allows us to be able to keep track of those questions easily and to get rid of them once we have answered them. Our speaker will take the opportunity, whether it is in between every couple of slides or every slide or whatever, or at the very end to get to those questions. So go ahead and let us know those questions whenever you have them, and we will get to them as soon as possible. And if you have further questions after that, we can continue to follow up on that. But if you're having other issues or you have other questions, whether it's something that is specifically technology because you're not hearing something or seeing something, if you just have a quick question for me, something I can answer but is not specifically something that our speaker will need to address, please use the chat feature. This is a little bit easier for me to keep track of while our speaker is presenting, and I will assist with those as quickly as possible. Whereas anything that our speaker needs to talk to, I will hold off on until we have the opportunity to ask him. But I think that is it for the introduction. It is now time for me to hand over the reins to Don. Don, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. So I'm really kind of excited to talk about ProQuest Historical Newspapers that are provided through the Marshfield Public Library, because it's an important collection of newspapers for those people from town that are interested in either family history or local history. And the Marshfield newspapers that are cover about 88 years of Marshfield's history. So there's a good chunk of Marshfield's history, both family and local, that are covered in these newspapers that you can get to through the Marshfield Public Library. As far as tonight goes, I really want to talk about three things. First off, a little bit about the historical value of newspapers, then how to locate other digital newspapers, because I know some people might be logged in here tonight that don't have access to the Marshfield Public Library or are looking for newspapers from other areas than just central Wisconsin. So we'll just kind of talk about a couple tips on where you can go to find some other newspapers. And then the rest of the evening will be spent talking about accessing ProQuest Historical Newspapers through the library, how you log into their account, what publications are available, different search strategies to give you better results, how to browse them either as they have a browse feature, or you can download them as a PDF and look at them that way, and then ways of saving the results. And we all know that when we start doing either family history or local history, once we find things, we want to have a way of going back to those items so that you have them for your records. And so that's what we'll talk about with saving the results. So just to get started, when we talk about historical newspapers, and it doesn't matter if you're doing family history or local history, they are important to your research because they really represent the shared stories that we share, that we all share. Within a community, we can be talking about community history that overlaps into family history. And if you're looking at family history, it overlaps into local history. So what's important about these records is they provide kind of that context for our ancestors and our community history. And one of the things we'll talk about is that they represent an alternate source for those vital events that family historians want to look for: birth, death, and marriages. So I'm going to show you a couple pictures and then to kind of give you a little bit of background here about why these records, why these historical newspapers are important. The first one is that they may precede required vital records. In the state of Wisconsin, the earliest birth record or earliest vital record that's recorded was in 1848 for a death. Statewide registration was required in 1907, and it wasn't until the following year that people generally started complying with it. So if you're looking for a death record, you sometimes turn up no record in the county courthouse. Well, the newspaper can really kind of help fill in or cover those gaps when you can't find that record at the courthouse. The lady in this picture is my great great uncle Wallace's wife, Lorena, and she died in 1886. And we never knew exactly when she died, but it was a newspaper clipping that actually provides the clue for her death, what the cause of her death was, and where she was buried. So we get this out of the Marshfield Times, September 3rd, 1886. So newspapers are important, providing information that you can't find in courthouses. They also provide a substitute for records that were either lost or destroyed. I think anybody who's done family history for a while has heard this story about, I sent for my records and they told me they were burnt in the fire when the courthouse burned. And even in Wisconsin, there were 6 different counties that had fires over the course of Wisconsin history. Earliest one was back in 1852, and the most recent one was in 1928. Some of them lost records, some of them the records were destroyed, but the indexes exist. But the point is that there are times when you're looking for a record and you can't find it in a courthouse because of some tragedy. And a fire is definitely a tragedy as far as the genealogist is concerned. And at times like that, newspapers provide a substitute source for looking for that information. They're also not limited by content or by the forms. And so this is an example of a marriage registration from my great aunt Caroline. She got married in 1887 down in Monroe County. And one of the things about those old registration certificates was they had, fill in the blank. And you could count on getting a handful of questions. There was actually 16 pieces of information that they asked for on this registration. It's not a lot of stuff to go on when it comes to writing kind of a family history. And so because a record is limited in what it can share with you, finding something in the newspaper is really good. Now, this is actually a copy of her wedding announcement in the Toma Journal in 1887, and it talks about the weather, it talks about the wedding, it talks about the times of the services and what the family did. So you're getting additional information besides what you might find on a registration form. Her wedding announcement in the paper went a little bit further in that it provided a whole list of the people who gave presents to the couple. And so we have Mr. and Mrs. Sutton, who gave a wash bowl and pitcher, a set of plates from her mother, bureau and table from her father-in-law. So it goes through and lists all the gifts that they received at this particular event. And that's not a normal occurrence, but there's always surprises when you're looking at newspapers trying to fill in family history data. And this was one of the really nice surprises to find. You also find things about residents in newspapers where they're not living any longer. So this is another one of their sisters. This is my Aunt Mary Jane, and when a great Aunt Mary Jane. And when Mary Jane died, there was a write-up in the paper, and it says that Mrs. Sweet died. The family was coming home because her husband was approaching death, and they went to pick up somebody else at the train. And while they were gone, their mother was home fixing supper, and she had a heart attack and passed away. And so sometimes you find things you don't expect. And one of the things about newspapers that this kind of is important to remind me of is that when you're looking for newspaper events, whether it's a local event or in a paper that's distant, you want to kind of check all of the areas where someone lived. And so my great Aunt Mary Jane, she was born in 1842. She lived in New York until 1873. In 1873, she came to the town of a Plain, north of Stratford or west of Stratford. She lived there until 1880. Then she moved to Monroe County, Wisconsin in 1894. And from there, in about 1900, she moved to Minnesota and lived in Brownsdale, Minnesota. And when you're looking for newspaper accounts, it's important to check every place when you're looking for different events. And here's Mary Jane, Mary Jane, she died in Minnesota, but here her obituary shows up in Stratford because she had been a resident in Stratford 37 years earlier, but she still had family in town or in that area. So one of the things that's important that when you're looking for newspapers, you want to try to include looking at all of the different areas where someone lived. And here in Marshfield, with this collection that's available from the Marshfield Public Library, you have access to, like I said, 88 years worth of newspaper reporting for Marshfield citizens. The last thing I want to mention is that besides using newspapers for family history, people who are doing local history find the use of newspapers extremely important also. You guys are probably familiar with the two books that were done by the Marshfield History Project in 1997 and then again in 2000 for the second volume. Those were based primarily on looking at microfilm copies of the newspapers. You know, I can remember breaking our project members into different groups to search different years of microfilms so that we could gather the information for those two books. Today, with digital newspapers being available, that search process is much easier because now, instead of just going through or scrolling through microfilm day after day, looking for information, trying to spot something that was important, you can deliberately search for things. So the online availability of digital newspapers really makes access to newspapers and the information they contain much better. And one of the things that people who do a lot of local history, writing articles on different historical events, or even taking a story and making it historically accurate, is to go back and check other newspapers or to look at newspapers. And they find that it's one of the most important sources for primary information when they're doing their searches. And again, what I think is important is that as local historians or family historians, that we try to use the papers when they're available. And it's nice to have them available for free. So I wanted to kind of just talk about a couple sources if you're looking for things other than Marshfield newspapers. The first one I'd mention is a program called Chronicling America. It's through the Library of Congress. It represents 48 states in the United States. New Hampshire and Rhode Island, I don't believe have newspapers on their files in Chronicling America, but it's a great source to check for just historical papers from across the country. And one of the things that, you know, sometimes we don't think about when we're looking at our family history is to pick a big city. Let's say my family came to the United States in 1883, they landed in New York. Look in the 1883 New York Times articles to see what was going on in New York. What did they see when they first got off the boat? So sometimes it's a matter of not looking specifically for your relative as much as it is to get background information of things they would have experienced. So one place to always think about is Chronicling America. It's a great site, easy to use, highly recommended. Another site that I'd recommend is if you're looking for a list of links to different newspapers that are available for free, or even some that have it's a paid subscription. This particular website, you can see on the bottom toolbar there where it says newspaper links. If you click on that, it will take you to a list of states or countries. And under there, for example, in the United States, it gives you 50 states. And then under 50 states, it gives you all the links for available online newspapers. And it's just a click away for finding or exploring what's all available in those newspapers. There's also some great educational materials on the Ancestor Hunt site. So if you go over by where it says more, you can click on that and it will drop down some tutorials on how to use different historical newspapers as you're doing your research. So that's kind of the general early stuff that I wanted to talk about before I got into talking about ProQuest. So we'll kind of switch gears and move to the real purpose of tonight is to talk about the ProQuest historical newspapers, specifically the Wisconsin collection. And so we start with this. This is what the homepage looks like for that. But how do you find it from the Marshfield Public Library site? That's where we'll start. So if you go to the marshfieldlibrary.org, then the website is listed down at the bottom. That takes you to the homepage of the Everett Roehl Marshfield Public Library. Now, to log into ProQuest, you have to go up where it says Search Catalog. I have an arrow up there. If you click on the Search Catalog, it will drop down to a list of items that are on the Everett Roehl Library website. And you specifically want to click on the e-sources. And when you do that, it brings down or drops down into a long list of items that are available through the library for us to use. And if you scroll down, they're in alphabetical order. If you scroll down far enough, you'll come up with ProQuest Historical Newspapers, a database of historical Wisconsin newspapers in downloadable PDF format, including the Marshfield Daily News and the Marshfield News Herald. And so you can look at that and you can see you have from 1920 to 2009 that are basically, or 1921 to 2009 that are basically covered in this database. So you click on it and it takes you to this site. This is actually the ProQuest site. And in order to use the site, you need to put in your library card number. So it's a matter of just typing in the barcode. And after you've done it a few times, you'll remember what your library card number is. And then it takes you directly to the ProQuest Historical Newspapers Wisconsin collection so you can start searching. It works really slick. So that's how to get to the site. Now we're going to go through and talk about a couple things, and I wasn't quite sure what order to put them in. So we're going to start on something that isn't necessary for everyone to do, but I'm going to give it to you as far as information so you're aware of it. So up in the upper right-hand header, you see the little guy sitting there at the end. There's just a silhouette of a man. You can create a research account on their site. You don't have to. You can use this site without doing it. But if you wanted to save your searches, then you need to have an account. And so first thing you do is you go up to that site, you bring in this drop-down box and you click on Create My Account. And it will bring up a few simple questions. They want your email address to go in there. Then they want you to create a password and then check off that you're over 13 years of age and that you consent to the collection and use of my personal information and everything else, just kind of routine stuff. So once you did all that, it's just a matter of clicking Create Account and, oh shucks. They didn't tell you when it comes to that password that they're picky. And so I was kind of flustered when I did this because I like to keep the password for all my family history accounts simple. And in this case, they have very specific instructions of what that password is going to be. So it's 8 characters long. It has to have a number. It has to have a lowercase and an uppercase letter, and then a special character. It's not a big deal, but it would be nice if they tell you these things beforehand. And then once you put that in and follow those instructions and you hit Create Account, it will take you to this. It says, welcome to my research. They don't say it here, but they actually send you an email to that email address that you have to verify that this is me. I want to create this account before you can start using it. So it's that simple. And to be honest, again, you don't have to create an account when you first start out. It works without. Now, this is what the page looks like after you're inside side of it, it says ProQuest Historical Newspaper Wisconsin Collection. I'm just going to mention a couple things in passing here as we get started. First off, the databases, it's not a big collection. There's actually 4 databases there. And right now, when you first sign in, what you're looking at is the ProQuest Historical Newspapers Wisconsin Collection. And so you really don't want to change anything. But you can see that they have stuff on coronavirus. They have some other content available, and then US Newsstream, which you can also get to through Badgerlink. I just left it checked at ProQuest because that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The other thing is the publications. And when it comes to the publications, one of the important things when you're doing research is to know what's available to do research on. And so what this does is it brings up a list of the areas or communities that are represented in this collection, and then the names of the newspapers. And so you can see across the top here where it says that there are 25 publications. So it's not a big database, but it's I think a very useful database. And if you click on it, actually I'm going to cheat and I'm just going to take you here. What's in this list is there are 5 communities: Green Bay, Sheboygan, Oshkosh, Wisconsin Rapids, and Marshfield. So those are the 5 communities in Wisconsin right now that are included in this Wisconsin collection. Among those 5 communities are actually 25 different newspapers. And so, for example, in Marshfield, there's 2 sets of newspapers: the Marshfield Daily Times, or the Marshfield Daily News, and then the Marshfield News Herald. There's some overlap in there because there's actually a couple other newspapers buried in those, but the way it's listed on their website is it's 2 different or 2 distinct databases for Marshfield. The one thing that these newspapers all have in common, whether you're looking at Green Bay, Sheboygan, Oshkosh, Rapids, Marshfield, is they are all Gannett publications today. And so Gannett has gone in and bought out those newspapers, and they hold the copyright on the original newspapers that they have. In one place, doing a little research on ProQuest and the historical collection, they mentioned that the Midwest collection, they were having Wausau and Stevens Point. This is a relatively new database, so it may be that those are coming down the line yet. I don't know that for a fact, because they've got these other Wisconsin communities that are owned by Gannett in there. It would make sense that they might be adding the other ones yet. This didn't go live until I think April of 2020. So it's entirely possible that things are still in the work. And in more than one place, you see that the Midwest collection for ProQuest history newspapers include Wausau and Stevens Point, which would be kind of nice to have available also, because then you really covered a good representative area of the state for the Gannett papers. So anyway, papers. This is kind of a little bit of the history of Marshfield newspapers. These aren't what's available on ProQuest, but since Marshfield came into being in 1872, this is a list of the newspapers that have been published in Marshfield. First paper was published in 1879, and the most current newspaper that we have published is still the Marshfield News Herald. What I think is interesting is when you look at this list and then look at what is available on ProQuest, you can see we have quite a few papers that aren't covered. They're the earlier ones. And then we have the Marshfield News and the Wisconsin Hub. And then we have the Marshfield News Herald. And those are the ones that are covered. And you can see the dates that they are covered, that are covered by the database. So that's important to know, is what you're looking at. So for example, if I'm looking for the death of Mrs. William Upham. Mrs. Upham died in 1912. Her death would not be reported in any of these newspapers on this database. So first message is, if you're looking for information, you have to know what information you're looking for and whether or not it would likely be reported. And in the case of someone who died in 1912, it wouldn't have been reported in either of these papers. So it doesn't pay to look for it. It'd be the wrong database to actually be searching. Okay. When it comes to the other papers, I just wanted to mention, and this is not a plug for these, but there are at least two paid subscription services that offer content, Marshfield newspaper content. First one is newspaperarchives.com. It costs $139.90 annually to have that subscription, and it covers papers from 1882 to 1920, which is really nice because in 1921 we go to what's available on the Marshfield Historical Newspaper Wisconsin collection. So you have from 1921 to 2009 available from the Historical Newspaper Collection, or you could get a subscription to Newspaperscom. Because they have the Gannett paper set up separately, you have to get the Publishers Plus, and that's $149.80. Again, I didn't tell you the prices to try to encourage you to get a subscription, but I wanted to tell you the value you're getting from the library, because you have 88 years there available that you would have to pay $149 for, and it's available for you for the use of your library card. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. Newspapers.com is also available for free through Badgerlink, and that is another resource that's available through the Marshfield Public Library. You can go to that same list of e-sources, scroll down and find Badgerlink, and then search for Newspapers.com Library Edition. And it covers a lot of Wisconsin newspapers other than the Gannett papers, but it does not cover these that are located in this historical collection. So you really need to use the library collection to look at the Marshfield papers from 1921 to 2009. So enough said about that. We're going to come back and talk about publications again. Now, when it comes to doing the searches, we're going to talk mostly about the basic search to start with, and then I'll show you the advanced search a little bit later. But searching for newspapers can be relatively simple, just a matter of putting in a name, or it can be a little bit more specific, and we'll show you an example in a minute, okay? So here we're going to talk about, the basic search tips first. And so when it comes to the search tips, these are things that you should kind of keep in mind when you're searching for things in the newspaper. And some of them are common or can be used interchangeable with other websites or other databases. And then again, everyone is a little bit specific or picky. For example, if you put quotation marks in the Library of Congress website, it tells you that you've got an illegal character there. You can't use it there. So you have to kind of get used to what each database requires. But these are kind of general things that can help make your search more specific. So the first one, and I think everybody probably knows this, is a matter of putting quotation marks around things. So in the case here of healthy eating, or William H. Upham, or the address 212 West 3rd Street, when you put the quotation marks around there, when the search is being conducted, it keeps everything together in that search. And so we'll give you an example or show you an example in a minute of how we do that. You also can do what's called nested searches, where you take a term and then add some variables. And so Mr. Ruppum is a good example. William Upham was the mayor of Marshfield. He was also the governor of the state of Wisconsin. Sometimes his initials are used for his name, WH instead of William. Sometimes you see WM instead of William. And so when you're doing a search, you can bracket the search and say Upham, so they're looking for Upham, and then put William in or governor. And so you're going to look and find all the places where it shows up as either William Upham or Governor Upham, knowing that it's the same person. You can also put the word and in there to narrow your search. So one of the things about ProQuest is when you start putting words into the search box, the basic search, it automatically considers that there's an and in there. So when you're looking for William Upham, it puts William and Upham to do the search. So it narrows it down for you right up front. But you can also use that when you're doing a search so that you are adding some other variables to give yourself more focused results. The word not is important, especially when you're doing someone like William Upham in Marshfield. He had a son, William Upham Jr., and if you don't want stuff about Jr., if you put the word not in there, it doesn't pull up William Upham Jr., it just skips that one. The same thing with Mr. Upham in Marshfield. He has a street named after him, so if you put Upham in as a general search term, you end up getting thousands of hits, and most of them are for addresses on Upham Avenue, and a lot of them are tied to the Knights of Columbus Hall because that was reported in all the weddings, funerals, lots of different events that were going on there over the years, and so you don't want to look at those that were listed with Avenue. In my family, I have family in upstate New York. They're the Tupper family, and they lived not too far from a place called Tupper Lake. And when you're trying to do historical newspaper searches, you have to get rid of that lake. And so something like that helps with the not, because every time Tupper came up, if you left it out, they would pull up Tupper Lake. By putting in not lake after it, you get all the Tuppers, but without the name of the lake being included. And then we also can focus or search the ProQuest Historical Newspaper Collection for Wisconsin based on the publication. And so when you're looking through this, you can do a search of Green Bay, Marshfield, Wisconsin Rapids, Sheboygan, and I think that might be it. You can do that by just doing a basic search. You search everything, but if you specifically want to search just Marshfield or just a specific issue of the Marshfield paper, you can do that also. And as we go through here, I will show you how you do that. So here's an example of a basic search. The command box comes up. I've typed in the name William Upham and I've put quotation marks around it, and I hit return, and it brought up a list of 378 times that the name occurred in that data set. That's quite a bit of names. That's more names that I want to sit down and look at one time. And I'm sure that everybody who's done newspaper searches have come up to this where they say, oh, I can't spend all day looking at that. One of the things about this collection is that there are ways of filtering it. And so the first thing I'd mention is that the first filter, the most important filter, is to think about those quotation marks. And when you look at this, William Upham with quotation marks around it bring up 378 results. If you look up William Upham without quotation marks, you end up with 18,340. So just using the quotation marks is a way of filtering it so that it's a more specific request than putting in both names, because William and Upham would be searching. So all the Williams and all the Uphams are being pulled up in the second column, whereas just William Upham, when they're together as a phrase, are being pulled up in the first column. Second thing you can do is you can sort by, over on the left-hand side, there's a filter column, apply filters, and you can filter based on relevance, or you can filter on whether you want to look at the most recent things or the older things. And when I'm searching things, I really do like to set it at either oldest first or most recent, depending on what I'm looking for, because it allows me to stop someplace and I can say that I searched to 2000 and I have to start in 1999. So by going in chronological order, I know what I've looked at before and where I can pick up and start again when I'm starting to look at my searches. Relevance is a really important search tool, though, because sometimes you're searching for more than a name. And by looking at the relevance based on multiple searches, it kind of helps pinpoint what you're looking for. And I will show you an example of that in just a minute. The other filter that you can apply over here is looking at things as far as a date goes. So we put in this William Upham as a basic search. We received 378 results. You look at the publication guide there, there's some little gray tabs underneath that bar graph. And you can actually take your cursor and move those tabs farther apart or bring them closer in. What I've done here is I've taken those tabs from the outside and moved them up to 1920 to 1929. The reason I did that was I just wanted to pick an example of what you would find when you narrowed the search. So we have 378 results there. By narrowing the search and updating it, you can see you bring that down to 13 results. 13 results is much easier to look at than 378. So depending on what you're looking for, if you know a specific date range, by adjusting those little gray tabs underneath, you can be more specific in your search. Below that, and it doesn't show here, you can actually click on the publication date and put in your own range if you want to look at a specific range. Say you know something happened between 1920 and 1922, you can put those dates in and actually look at it that way. All right. The other thing I wanted to mention here was that if you look at this list, 378 results is quite a number of results to look at. We can also focus it by publication. This is the second or another part of the list. And you can see that when we get a little bit farther down, we're looking at more than just Marshfield, Wisconsin. We have newspapers from Sheboygan, from Green Bay. So this list is including all the papers that are published in this particular database set. And what you want to do is focus it so you're looking at specific locations. And to do that, you go back to the publications. So you would go up where it says publications in the header, click on that. And then you go down where it says publications. And if you look where the line starts off, where the little block boxes are there with letters, all, and then A through Z, you can see that B, M, W, C is all highlighted. And if you click on the M, for example, it will take you to just the Marshfield papers. And so if you want to search just, and you have to search them separate when you do this, if you want to search just 1921 to 1927, you could click that database, or if you want to search 1927 to 2009, you could click that database. It's just a matter of picking which database you want to look at. And what I did was I pulled up the Marshfield Daily News, and then you can search this publication, and where that arrow points to the command line, you can type in your search, and it will bring up a list of, in this case, I did William Ruppum again, and you get 8 articles that show up in the Marshfield Daily News between those two dates, or between 1921 and 1927. And so it's a matter of just looking at the publications and pulling up the specific publication that you want to look at. You can do the same thing if you wanted to look at the Marshfield News Herald, the same thing. You pull up that database, type in the name, and you would get a separate or distinctly different set of results. Now, one of the things that happens a lot when people in town find things, they post them on Facebook, and then they send me a picture and say, what can you tell me about this? And this is a picture that was actually shared this week on Facebook for Marshfield. It was identified as a Chicago Northwestern picture from Wausau. The person who saw it said, that's not Wausau, that's Marshfield, and sent it down here to a Chicago Northwestern page that is on Facebook for Marshfield. And the question was, what can we tell you about it? Well, we know it's Marshfield because that's the building that is now Mojo's. It's the corner of 2nd and Central Street. But we didn't have a lot of other data about it. So we look at the picture to see what we can talk about. And so on the front and on the side is the logo for Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. It's a parade scene, so we could type in parade. And then we kind of did an approximate date by looking at the way people were dressed somewhere between 1940 and 1960. That was just a guess. And then while the picture was on the page, someone said that might be the Centennial Parade for Chicago Northwestern. And nobody knew whether or not that was in Marshfield or not. So how do you use that information to find something in the newspaper about this particular picture? And it works the same way when you're doing family history. You go in and you start looking at what you can find. And so we know that Chicago and Northwestern is a phrase that we want to keep together. So if you look at that command line up there, you see that Chicago and Northwestern are in quotation marks. It keeps the phrase together. And then we want to see if there's a Chicago and Northwestern mentioned with a parade. And we also want to see if it's mentioned with the word centennial. And when we did that, and we were looking at the Marshfield News Herald database here, there was only one result, and it was in June 30th, 1958. That sounds good. You think they're there then. You pull up the article, and the article looks like this. 10 years ago today, and it says that about 4,500 people visited the Chicago and Northwestern Centennial Train exhibit in Marshfield yesterday. So we know that that this particular article is referring to a train that was here. They had the Centennial. It doesn't say anything about a parade right there, but that storyline kind of matches the picture. And the other thing, before I move to the next slide, I want to just mention is that hit term highlighting. When you put in a search parameter and hit return, it will highlight the words that are in your search. And so you can see Chicago and Northwestern are highlighted there, Centennial is highlighted, and Parade is highlighted. In the article, because I pulled this up separately and I did some finagling, the Centennial is the only thing that's highlighted. But most of the time when you look at the original article, when it pulls up, all those same phrases will be highlighted when you're looking at the full page. And that's referred to as hit term highlighting, and it really helps you look at the page and identify where on the page a particular story is going to show up. So with this information, though, we know that this particular picture that we're trying to track down when it was taken appeared in 1958, but it was reporting something that happened 10 years earlier in 1948. Now, technically, because of the filter that's applied here, and that we were looking specifically for the Marshfield News Herald data collection, that should have shown up if that was being reported in the 1948 paper, and it didn't. So what you might do is try another search, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute, or you can go back and do it a different way. We have the date that this appeared in the Marshfield paper to start with, June 30th, 1948. So, oops, I guess I did do it this way first. Okay, so this is the advanced search, and you have Chicago and Northwestern again as that search that you were looking for. You have the operator and with a Centennial, and then you were also looking for a parade. So this is basically searching the exact same database we searched a minute ago, but to see if by using the advanced search box it might show up. And the answer is that it didn't. It showed up a number of different sites that matched all those terms, but none of them had the date for 1948. You can see down at the bottom is the article we were looking at. And then there were two other articles that showed up in 68 and 72 talking about, just happened to have all those same words in the search box. So we didn't find what we were looking for, but we know that in June 30, 1958, the story said that appeared in the June 1948 newspapers. So you can look for this a different way. And so you go back up to publications and you pick which newspapers you want to look at. Again, we're going to look at the News Herald. And then you pick the specific dates that you want to look at. I'm going to save us some steps here because the article said that it was reported June 30th, 1948. I went back to look for June 30th and it wasn't there. And then so I did what every good genealogist or family historian or local historian would do is if it doesn't show up exactly where it's supposed to, you look a day or two on either side of it. And so I put in the 1948, and you can select the year anywhere from 1927 to 2009. then the month, and all 12 months are listed. And then every day newspaper is published during that month, the date will come up. And so June 30th didn't work. I put in June 29th, and down below where it says June 29th, page 1 of 12, you click on it and you end up with this being the appearance of the page. And if you look over to the right-hand side down at the bottom of the screen, you can actually see train exhibit and parade showing up. So this is going to be what the paper I want to look at. Now you have a couple different ways of looking at papers on the heritage, the ProQuest Historical Newspaper Collection. One is to browse the issue, and that's what we'll do first. And it's just a matter where you see that blue arrow and browse this issue. If you click on it, it will bring up the ability to move the paper around, look at it, move it around and look at it, highlight it, magnify it, a number of things. So you see a toolbar down there. The first two buttons, the circle and the plus, magnification, it either makes it bigger or smaller. If the image is something that you want to rotate, the next two buttons allow you to rotate it either clockwise or counterclockwise. 1-to-1 is just the ratio of the size of the issue. And then the next button over takes you back, just backs you up to the beginning. And the arrow with the download sign allows you to download a PDF. And then the arrows on each end are back and forth movements across the different pages. Or you can look at the film strip view and take your mouse and just click on each different page and it will take you to the new page. So if you're someone who likes to sit and look at historical newspapers and read them like you're reading a current newspaper, the browse this view is really kind of a nice way of doing it. It gives you kind of the feel of a newspaper. You don't get the feel of it in your hand, but you can still get the same feel of it while you're looking at it. So that's one way of looking at these. Second way is if you go up on the top, it says you can download a PDF. So if you click where it says PDF, just click on that green circle with the PDF in the middle of it. It will actually download the PDF to your computer. And in my computer, for example, when it downloads, it puts them down at the bottom. And so then you can just open up that PDF and click by clicking on that. And it brings up a full page of the newspaper for that day. And so once you have that, across the top is a toolbar again. You can look at, it's page 1 of 1, and there's only one page per PDF. You can adjust the magnification, 50%, 67%, 75% or more. And you just plus or minus there. The little box next to the plus sign is a page that represents fit to the page. So if you click on it, right now it's fit to the whole page of that paper. You click on it, it will take it to fit to the width. So you'll have actually this picture is fit to the width because it goes all the way across, and this one is fit to the page because it's the full page in the viewing box. And then on the right-hand side, you see the gray scroll bar we're all used to when you're looking at something that you want to scroll up and down on. So that's how you find the paper, find the articles, what they look like when you find them. Now, one of the disadvantages, and if I had to complain about anything, is this doesn't have a clipping tool in it. Everybody probably knows that when you have a subscription to some of the different, well, actually, it doesn't have to necessarily be a subscription, but if you're looking at some historical newspaper databases, there's a mechanism where you can clip out a specific article and save it. This doesn't have it. You can save the whole PDF if you want, just by downloading it and then saving it to your computer, or you have to go and use what's called the snipping tool to kind of select. Now, most people are familiar with the snipping tool, but well, not all. It wasn't too long ago that I learned about it. But if you haven't used a snipping tool before, it's really convenient way of saving information out of the newspapers, off of any website. If you've got an image in front of you, you can snip it. And in order to find that snipping tool on your computer, it's a matter of going down to the start box in the lower left-hand corner of PC, type the word snipping, and usually I got as far as SNI on mine, and it brings up the snipping tool. I always drag it and save it on my toolbar down at the bottom. You can see right here where the arrow is. That's my snipping tool. It's just always there, and I can guarantee you I use it 100 times a day. Very convenient thing. And if you take it down on the toolbar, it just stays there, so you don't have to look for it every time. But that's where you get the snipping tool from. Now, in order to, oh shucks, I skipped a slide. Sorry about that, but we'll go back here. And so this is a snipping tool, the box that comes up. And right now, if you look at this, you can see the screen is kind of grayish. When you click on this here where it says new, it won't do it right now, but if you did it on your screen, when you have the snipping tool up, it will bring up a little crosshairs, and then you can go up over and put those crosshairs on the corner, come down to where you want the snip to end, and go over to where you want the snip to end that way. And once you let go of the mouse, it will save that particular area that you put in that box as a snip. And so, for example, here, what I did the first time is I started new here, and I just saved this particular part. And when you look at this here, you can see this is the first snipping I made where I got the title. It was a matter of putting the mouse or the corner here, the crosshairs there, and bringing it over here. And then when you let go of holding the mouse, it snipped that part, and you can go copy and paste. Did the same thing for the first column. And you can see that again here. You'd start here with a new snip, hold the mouse down, drag it to the bottom where you want to end, and it will make a square around it. You let go of it, and it saves that as a snip. Once you have the snip on the snipping tool, you can just copy it and paste it into a document. And so this is something I do with lots of different newspaper clippings, and I have folders full of these things that I don't want to lose. Now, one of the things that's important about the historical newspapers collection is when you go to save something, unless you're saving the entire PDF, you don't have the credit for where it came from. So you want to make a point of copying that information. We'll go back a couple pages here, right there. And what I would do here is I would have copied the upper part where the date of the paper is, where it says June 29th to 1948, page 1 of 12. And then the Marshfield News Herald, Marshfield, Wisconsin, the date again, and then that it was on page 1. And I paste that information there on the top so that I have a credit of where that information came from. I also, again, because it's important to document your sources, I would copy the URL, the line across the top on the command line that tells you where that particular record is located, and then I would paste that into the document that I was saving it to. Again, the idea is you always want to document your sources and where the article came from. Now, in this particular article, I also highlighted a picture that was in there. This is not the picture that was being circulated on Facebook, but it's a picture that appeared in the Marshfield newspaper of what was the first Chicago Northwestern train. It was actually made in 1848, and it was part of the exhibit that was traveling on this particular day, and it was supposed to have been coming to Marshfield and set up on display. Now, that was one way of saving it, just as a document. The other thing you can do is you can go in and copy the text. And I always get nervous when it comes to copying the text because optical character recognition is not always perfect. This one did pretty good though. So what I did was I was looking at my PDF. I went into the picture and I wanted to copy the caption. It was a matter of highlighting the caption and then pasting it into a document and then fine tuning it. You can see when you look at this, you've got a couple mistakes. I got a hyphen there. There was a period at here that was supposed to have been a comma. There was a hyphen word there that really didn't need it, and a couple other things. It was just a matter of going back and proofreading it, and you have all that information saved. It becomes a matter of personal preference whether you want to have the actual image or if you want to have just the text. But whether you use an image or text, you always want to make sure you download your source. Now, on this particular slide, I wanted to show you something. I went up and I copied the URL once I had this thing saved. I downloaded it. So what I was actually saving was the address for the download on my computer. And that's not what I really want to save. There's another way of properly citing the sources for the papers from the historic collection, ProQuest Historical Newspaper Collection. And that is a handy little tool over here. Underneath the arrow, it says cite. And if you click on that cite, it will bring up the proper citation to add to your newspaper clipping, whether it's an image or a text. That's the proper way to cite that article. So it comes in real handy when you want to try to do something correctly. You can actually change the style, and I just left that one there, but you can change the different styles of citations to document your source also. And then the last one that I wanted to mention in this line, if we're looking at that top line, is if you go all the way over to the right-hand side, it says all options. And this is where you have to be, well, you need to be logged in order to use this. When it comes to saving the results, up to this point, I was talking about making a copy of something that you could save as a Word document, a publisher document, or as a PDF and file in your computer. You can also download the PDF of the entire document and save that to your computer. Or if you've signed in, remember that little guy up on the top where we first started, we created an account and you're looking at accounts, you can actually create a folder on your page when you're logged in that saves your searches. And what that looks like is this. These are just two searches that I've done. It gives you the name of the paper and it allows you to create or write a note. So in this case, the notes, I put that this was the Chicago Northwestern Centennial Parade. And I don't remember what I wrote, and I can't show you here, but it had to do with the image that I just showed you clipping and putting together as a record for that page. And then I had pulled up another one earlier. It was Bill Upham Jr. talking about his dad. And so we have that link to that newspaper, and then the notes kind of explain what is in that link. And so when you're coming back and forth, going back in and out of this program, you can always be documenting your sources or your search results in here. It doesn't save a clipped article. It takes you back to the full PDF, but it's a one way of saving your searches that way. My personal preference is once you find something you want to put it on your computer, you can always go back and find it here, but I like to get things onto the computer. And if you look at the Word document that I created back here, you could save that as a Word document and upload it to Ancestry if you wanted. You could attach it to your family trees or just put it with file information in your family files. So, all right. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was, I don't know how long I've been talking now, but I wanted to make a couple points in that. First thing is that newspapers are a really important source of information. Whether you're dealing with family history, looking for an obituary, this is my great-great-grandmother. She was actually a resident of Unity. They moved to Unity, Wisconsin on April 1st, 1873. After her husband died in 74, she kind of moved back and forth between Monroe County, Wisconsin, and out east in New York, where she had come from. And it took a long time to find her obituary. I actually drove all the way to New York to find that obituary and didn't find it. And then when historical newspapers started to be put online, it was something that I could look for just with the search engine for Mary Spencer, and it showed up. but it gives you information. And so for family history, one of the things that's a plus about historical newspapers is it adds to information that you may not have. Then the other thing for local history, everything that's in a newspaper covers people, community events, schools, churches, governments, organizations, businesses, you name it, it ends up being, well, even stuff you don't think should be in the newspaper at one time ended up in the newspaper. It's an important collection of information for both family history and local history. And so one of the things that I think is really important about this collection is that it's made available with your library card through the Everett Roehl Marshfield Public Library. And so without paying a subscription price, you can actually go in and search almost 90 years of Marshfield history. And so with that, I would just mention one more thing, and then I'm going to quit and take questions. ProQuest has some really good training materials online. So if you go to ProQuest Historical Newspapers online training, and I'll leave this sit here, but that is the link to the training guides. And they will go through and talk to you about search engines, putting in search parameters, how to enter them, what to do if you're not finding the results you're looking for, and things like that. It covers a lot of ground talking about using this collection. It's a good source. And so I'd recommend, if you haven't been doing newspaper searches, that you check that out, and I'm sure it'll help you get started. Otherwise, once the library opens back up, I will be back there on Tuesdays from 10 to 2 eventually, and I would always be glad to answer questions then. So with that, I'll stop. And Bethany, if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
All right, so our first question should be relatively straightforward. Kathleen asked, is the Stratford paper that you referenced early on in this presentation, is that available in this system?
I know it's not. The papers that are in the ProQuest Historical Collection are just for the cities I mentioned. That was actually one that I had from a microfilm copy. I wish it was. Stratford would be a great newspaper to have digital copies of.
It's also close enough to us that it would be very helpful for us to have that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about the Stratford papers is, the Marshfield papers, is they report quite an area around the community for news. And so it's not uncommon to find things reported in the Marshfield newspapers in the early days of things up to Medford, over to Stetsonville, Unity, Colby, Loyal. They all got reported in Marshfield also.
All right, Robert says, I am now living in Texas, as you are aware. How does he access this? Does he need to get a library card to access then? And if so, how does he do that? So I have been a part of this conversation already, and so I'm going to respond to this one more time. So most libraries are going to require that your library card is for that community. If you are temporarily out of state, or if you have some other instance, you might be able to get a temporary card. Due to the pandemic, we are offering the ability to get a temporary card through our website. Additionally, there might be ways to work with us for access. And I also strongly encourage reaching out to your local libraries as well. They may not specifically have the direct resources that we have because we're in the Marshfield area where you would be doing your genealogy research, but reaching out to your library and the reference staff there, they're going to be able to answer a lot of questions and hopefully get some resources to you as well. But these are questions that would be great to follow up with our checkout and circulation department, because I don't know the specifics and everything is a little bit wonky due to the pandemic anyways. And a lot of resources that aren't necessarily always available are available right now. And then also, as I said, I always encourage, whether you speak with our adult information desk or the reference desk or a local library, a lot of those resources they are going to have as well. So
Yeah. In this case, Bob, I'm just thinking that if you don't have access to the Marshfield Public Library online, this would be one where the newspapers.com would cover that same period. So check with your local library to see what they have available as far as electronic sources. You may have access to some of that information through them.
So we're going to wait a few moments here in case we have any other questions that anybody might have pertaining to what we've discussed or the specifics regarding ProQuest.
If there's no further questions, then I'm going to put a plug in for next month. Next month on March 10th, Maida Hess, the adult service librarian at the Marshfield Public Library, will be talking about our database collection for the high school annuals, the Marshfield Senior High School annuals, and a program called Clio that is also available on the library website. And again, that's also free. It should be an interesting presentation. So if you enjoy the Family History Talks, I hope you come back for that one.
All right, and I didn't see any other questions pop up, so I think we will call that a wrap. One more time, thank you so much to everybody that has joined us this evening. Have a great night.